This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your friend with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge. We're going to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, relationships, intimacy, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Ooh, can't help myself. Anyway, we're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up, you're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we dive in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content in Naarm, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're ready, let's flap and do this. Oh my God, is there such thing as too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever, it's my podcast. I'm leaving it in.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up a couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey gang, just before we jump into this episode, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to access my new mini course for free before I start charging for it in future. It's for people with vulvas and it's quick to complete. It's all about demystifying the female body and pleasure anatomy and getting some basic fundamentals to understand your body better. It's called Pussy Pleasure Secrets, Your Roadmap to Bedroom Bliss. You can grab it on the freebies page of my website or in the show notes. It's a great little free resource to kind of dip your toe in or act as a bit of a taster for my work. So if you've ever been curious about this sort of thing and you just don't know where to start, or you want a really quick, easy, accessible, non-threatening way to get the ball rolling and start working on this stuff, this is a great place to start. Hello, my labial lovers. Welcome back to the lounge. Today we're going to be exploring the relationship between your feet and your pelvic floor, your pleasure and your overall health. So we're going to touch on how high heels and the shoes that you wear impact you in more ways than you know, how your posture impacts your pelvic floor and your nervous system, why it's so good for you to walk with bare feet as much as possible, and the connection between your feet and your sex life, which may seem a little bit far-fetched right now, but we're going to get into that link. So I've got the wonderful Dr. Emily with me, who's a functional podiatrist and human movement specialist. Emily is the founder of EBFA Global, creator of the Barefoot Training Specialist certification, author of Barefoot Strong, and CEO and founder of Naboso Technology. With over 23 years in the fitness industry, Dr. Emily Splichal has dedicated her medical career towards studying postural alignment and human movement as it relates to barefoot science, foot-to-core integration, and sensory integration. Amazing. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
So this is maybe going to feel slightly left of field for my listeners, but I love to draw links between pelvic floor health, sexuality, nervous system health, pleasure, all of this that people might not necessarily make the connection themselves, aren't super obvious. So I guess firstly, maybe if we just sort of hash out the connection between your feet and the pelvic floor and your pelvic floor health. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So there is a fascinating connection between your foot muscles and your pelvic floor muscles. And it's actually through fascial lines. The name of that fascial line is called the deep front fascial line. And it runs from the tips of your toes across the bottom of your foot, through your lower leg, inner thighs, deep hip, into the pelvic floor. And it's actually more specifically the posterior pelvic floor. And then it goes up into the diaphragm and it continues all the way up to your tongue. And what I teach patients about this foot to core connection, or toe to tongue, if you want to go that far, is that it's an important role of how we stabilize our pelvis, how we find strength within our body, how you actually control posture, and really how we stand and how we move always affects our overall pelvic health and pelvic alignment. So yeah, that's one of my favorite connections in every patient I'm speaking about foot to core with them.
Cool. So have you sort of noticed that you can work on someone's feet to affect their pelvic floor, or are you kind of like, do you target the feet first in order to help support someone who's got some issues with their pelvic floor?
Yep. So I'll do both. Sometimes it is a bottom up issue. So maybe the individual's foot type is causing some weakness, which is then traveling up and causing maybe a disconnect in their pelvic floor. And maybe some of that disconnect in the pelvic floor is because of the pelvis position that is created by the foot posture or the foot position. So that could be one example. And then I teach about building from the ground up stability, alignment, and strength. However, sometimes I will have a top down, which means the issue is actually originating in the pelvis. Maybe it's the deep hip, it's the glute, it's the low back, something peripheral to the deep core pelvic floor, which might be inhibiting the pelvic floor. And then that inhibition of the pelvic floor is causing, let's say, instability downward, that now they have plantar fasciitis or heel pain. So it could be bottom up, top down. And then the way that I reestablish this connection is always in integration. So I try not to build foot strength that is disconnected from the pelvic floor. So not like doing bicep curls for your foot or bicep curls for your pelvic floor. I always try to integrate them. I may start with an awareness exercise because I find a lot of my patients don't really know how to find their pelvic floor. They don't know what the sensation is. And then when they're trying to contract their foot, it's hard to feel the connection because they don't know the movement that the pelvic floor would make. So that's a lot of what I teach as well.
So if someone, because that happens a lot in sessions with me as well, where I notice that people aren't really able to be aware of their pelvic floor muscles and what it actually feels like to engage them. What are your go-to cues to help people isolate their pelvic floor muscles and actually be able to feel and identify when they are engaging them?
Yes, there's a couple ways in which I teach it, either on the back, so you're on the floor, on a table, something like that. So you're on your back. That way is actually a little bit easier because you're pushing into something. And then a progression of that, or just another variation, would be standing up. And then can you feel and find the pelvic floor standing up in gravity without pushing into something? But I like to do a clock analogy where they're essentially drawing 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock, 3 to 9. So they're feeling that clock and the lift as they're doing it. They're visualizing it. So the eyes are shut as they're doing it. I also like to do the Kegel Pugel way, which is stop your pee, stop your poo. And they're essentially lifting and feeling the anti-gravity component to it. Now, one thing that is important is that if people don't know how to engage it or what it is supposed to feel like, then sometimes it could be like, well, how do I know? Right. So if you take your hands and you bring them just inside your ASIS, so just inside your pelvis bone, and you palpate there, then when you engage your pelvic floor, you'll feel tension underneath your fingers just inside the ASIS. That's what I teach other coaches to do so that they know that the client is engaging properly, because obviously it's hard to palpate otherwise, but the listeners could do that as well.
Yeah, great. So I'm just trying to picture, I'm not great with my anatomy off the dome, but the ASAS, is that when you say pelvic bone, do you mean kind of like that hip, like iliac crest kind of area just in from that? Yeah.
Just inside the iliac crest, yes.
Yeah. Beautiful. Cool. Okay. So when you talk about foot types, are these like, people who have higher arches or wider feet or things like that, or and are kind of born with different foot types and that impacts things? Or are you talking about they've worn certain shoes that have kind of molded their feet and changed the shape of their feet and now have a particular foot type?
I would say a little bit prior, meaning they were born with a flexible flat foot. So there's some sort of ligament laxity in it. When they sit down, there's an arch. As soon as they stand up, the foot completely collapses. That's a type of a foot. Typically a little bit less stable. I call it unlocked. And if your foot is unstable or unlocked, theoretically your pelvis is also. So then that's where it's going to be difficult to engage into the pelvic floor, etc. However, on the side of, is it the foot type that created this malalignment, or the shoes? Could be in the case of bunions. And bunions, which is the deviation of the big toe and the bump on the inside of the foot, that is often associated with instability up the chain. Typically the glutes are sleeping on that one side, and that's often associated with weaker or disconnected pelvic floor as well. So it could be a little bit of the foot type. Oftentimes I find that imbalances you see in the foot further along in life or years is because of this structure that we were just born with, which could be the ligament laxity.
Gotcha. So talk to me about high heels and the impact that they have on your pelvic floor and on, and therefore on your pleasure. I've got some, strong opinions about high heels myself, but it's always interesting to hear people that really specialize in this area talk about them, because I feel like it's just this incredibly, it's just wild that it's so normalized and expected often in a lot of cases and workplaces for women to wear high heels, given how bad they are for us.
Yes. So from a pelvic floor perspective, I'm going to focus on the high heel purely from what it does to your skeleton. And then the skeleton, or your posture, your alignment, essentially sets the foundation through which the muscles would contract. So when you're in a high heel, honestly, it doesn't even matter how high. It could be even 3 inches. Not sure what that is in millimeters, but it's 3 inches. And what happens is your ankle then goes into a high heel position, or plantar flex, right? And then as you plantar flex, to maintain your center of gravity in these high heels, your pelvis has no choice but to tilt forward. And then you get the sexy arch of your back, which comes with heels. But the anterior tilt puts the pelvis in a position that makes it very difficult to activate your pelvic floor. So that is a position of a inhibited pelvic floor. It creates very dominant anterior muscles, or your hip flexors, which can reciprocally inhibit the glutes, which is trying to keep the pelvis stable in the other direction. So that's really where I would put the greatest effect of high heels on pelvic floor health, is posturally and skeletally what happens to the body. And then you just chronically do that, and then we end up in a passive postural position that is a little bit more lordotic, which, if someone doesn't realize that or have that understanding of pelvis position to pelvic floor, then they might not realize that that's what's impacting the inhibited pelvic floor, or that's what's making it not be as strong or disconnected, and what's causing low back pain, or if it's focusing on sexual health and things like that. Pelvis position is very important to a healthy pelvic floor.
Yeah, totally. And, if you've got weakness or tension in your pelvic floor from wearing high heels a lot, and from that pelvis being in a position that it's not really designed to be in, that's going to inhibit the amount of pleasure that you can feel as well. So that's kind of where I try to, educate people, like, hey, this is actually going to affect your sex life if you're wearing high heels a lot. But then there's also all of the other kind of health ramifications, like, if you sort of sidestep just focusing on the pelvic floor stuff, what are some other, drawbacks to wearing high heels regularly, like, shortening the calf muscles and things like that?
Yeah. So if we look at the rest of the impacts of high heels, would be starting at the toes, you're getting the compression of the toes. You could get hammer toes and bunions. When you constrict the front of the foot, you can now get neuromas. That then goes back towards the back of the foot where you're tightening the muscles in the bottom of the foot and the plantar fascia. So there's plantar fasciitis. That goes into the calf, which could lead to calf tightness. So when you're not in the heel, you're predisposed to Achilles tendonitis or just compensation patterns from limited ankle mobility, which can then affect the knees. Then we can go further up, not necessarily to the pelvic floor, but it can lead to a lot of low back compression issues just because of how the skeleton dumps into the vertebra. And then that can go all the way up to the shoulders, the neck. I'm sure it affects headaches and things like that as well. Just it's putting the body in a position of tightness, you could say.
Yeah. And when you're kind of looking at it from a fascial perspective, you were just describing the fascia in the foot. And if you think about cramming your feet into these really restrictive little cages, that's going to be shocking for your fascia. And the feet are kind of like ground zero. That's where everything, like that's your sort of your basis and your connection to the earth. And I just can see how easily that would travel up the body and create havoc everywhere else. So, I'm very big into like barefoot shoes and walking around barefoot as much as I can. I also have like some strong kind of opinions around the way that high heels have kind of been marketed to women as this like feminist, like an icon of like femininity and, being a boss bitch and stuff. And actually they're just basically keeping us vulnerable and helpless because you can't run in them. You're in pain. It's very much catering to the male gaze. I just hate them. I absolutely hate them. I wish they didn't exist. But, a lot of people love their heels and shoes is, such a big thing for some people. But I'm such a tomboy anyway that, you would never catch me dead in heels. And when I have tried to put them on just to feel what they feel like to walk in, I am mortified. I cannot fathom why people do that to themselves.
A lot of stress on the body, a lot of stress. And I can definitely say from being in New York City for 20 years that it becomes now not so much because athleisure is very trendy right now. But when I first moved to New York and the whole Sex and the City era, it was just this position of power, right? And women were kind of driving up in the kind of the business kind of C-suite level of things and really demanding. And it kind of associated that. So there's stigmas that I agree do need to be broken around that.
Yeah. Like all of the kind of like, I can do what a man can do, but I can do it in heels is very similar to that. Like I can do what you can do bleeding messaging, which, on the surface looks like a really powerful feminist statement, but actually, anyway, I just think is ultimately super disempowering and then trying to force us to fit into a man box and do it in pain. And we're exhausted. So, all right. So I'd love to chat a little bit about just other kinds of shoes, how they impact our health, our posture, our nervous system, everything like that, because I don't wear heels, but I'm absolutely shocking for wearing like slides. Or, sometimes not so much these days, but I used to wear a lot of thongs or flip-flops, I think you would call them. And they're shocking for your feet too. And I know this. But I'd love to hear, and even just, sort of, the kinds of running shoes and boots that people wear that have all of this extra ankle support, but actually, kind of create a reliance on that and potential weakness. I have a very rudimentary knowledge of this stuff. So I'd love to hear from you as the expert, how the choice of shoes that we wear can impact these things. Hey, baby babes. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that I'd love you to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the Poddy to mingle in. There you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies, behind the scenes, or discounts for offerings from guests who have been interviewed on the podcast. There'll also be hopefully, inspiring, thought-provoking conversations and support from a community of labial legends like yourself. My vision for this is that it becomes a really supportive, educational and hilarious resource for you to have more access to me and a safe space to ask questions you can't ask anywhere else. So head over to the links in the show notes or look up the Labia Lounge group in Facebook and I'll see you in there. And now back to the episode.
Yeah, so I like to think of the foot, which you will appreciate this because it has to do also with the pelvic floor then, is around sensory. So we really need to feel and connect to our feet. And then the foot placement, every step that we take, it's really a sensory experience, which is so the pelvic floor as well, that you have to be able to feel and connect and, see it, be one with it, all that fabulous stuff. So anything you put on your foot, shoes, is going to take away some level of that sensory connection and that sensory experience. Remembering that we want to be as sensorially connected to our feet as possible for optimal movement. So that would be ideally a more minimal shoe, something that does not have a drop, not lots of cushion, not lots of stiffness. So it's something that you could kind of twist and wring out almost like a rag, kind of like a sock shoe in a sense. Mm-hmm. That's ideal. Now, a lot of people in the footwear industry starts to push other trends such as cushion, Hoka, maximal shoes, which are in the completely other direction. And they put a lot of money and technology into developing all these different shoes. But the cushion in the shoe is taking away the sensory information and the sensory connection. So we just know that, right? That as soon as you put cushion in shoes, you're sensorily disconnected. There is some advantage that I will give people with Hoka, which would be the rocker. So a shoe that has a 4-foot rocker in it actually allows you to walk in a proper way if you have certain limitations in your foot, namely the big toe, the second toe, a neuroma, something in the 4-foot that is preventing you from taking long steps. And long steps are actually a really important part of how you mobilize the pelvis to keep the pelvic floor healthy, is you have to take long steps and walk fast enough. So that's where, yeah, absolutely. Yes. So that's where I try to not say Hoka is evil in the sense of like how you're saying like high heels are evil, because there is a time and place where there may be a benefit of a rocker that goes in a Hoka, right? But just know there's the cushion. As far as other shoes, like you had asked about slides and flip-flops or thongs and things like that, is the flatness of a flip-flop or a thong or a slide, that doesn't bother me. I don't care that they're flat because your foot is designed to stabilize itself. It's more that it's not connected to your foot. And what that means is that every time you take a step, you're going to walk out of the shoe unless you do something. So people either grip onto the shoe and they carry it, or they kind of scoop their foot. I call it flip-flop foot, and they kind of circumduct their foot around like an egg beater and they're walking like that. Or they'll do something, or they'll just drag their feet. And then if you start dragging your feet, well, that completely starts to derail the way that you walk. So I like to look for sandals that are connected to the foot. They're actually strapped on somehow. So that's kind of how I start to look at footwear.
Totally. Yeah, I remember learning about how with thongs or slides, you do end up just subconsciously slightly gripping with your toes, and then it's sort of affecting the way that you walk, so you're not walking as naturally. And if you're doing that a lot, it just becomes part of your gait, and yeah, not ideal. What about shoes with like all of this? Because I feel like it's marketed to us that it's so amazing to have all of this added support, all of this ankle support and things like that. But then I feel like I've read a fair bit of stuff around how that can create more instability and weakness because we're relying so heavily on that additional support that then when we are barefoot or we do wear a different kind of shoe, we've got weak ankles and we don't have enough of our own kind of we don't have enough strength and like stability in all of the kind of muscles and tendons and ligaments fortifying our foot to kind of cope without that additional ankle support or cushioning or whatever that they've added in? Like, what do you think about becoming dependent on all of these high-tech shoes?
Yes, so there is always an exception to every rule, and there are certain feet that actually quote unquote need the support. But that's going to be the smaller percent here. A majority of people have the ability to stabilize the foot and the ankle without artificial support coming from the shoe or the footwear. Now, yes, if you chronically use it and you don't train your foot and ankle stability and strength and awareness, it will become weaker. So what I will tell people, even if I prescribe orthotics for someone, I will still give them exercises. If I recommend a certain footwear that might be more structured, I'm still recommending exercises, release the feet, have this moment of barefoot so that you're trying to balance and find that middle ground. So yeah, mass majority of people, we have the ability to stabilize. Again, there's always outliers to every rule.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, I'd love to get a little bit more into barefoot theory, but first, let's do the segment Get Pregnant and Die. And this is where I ask all of my guests if they have a story or anecdote from their sex education that jumps out that you feel like sharing.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die.
Don't have sex in the missionary position. Don't have sex standing up. Just don't do it. Promise?
Oh, like a myth?
Well, it could be. It could be something, some kind of myth that you learned and you learnt later on that's totally bogus. It could be something that happened in a sex ed class at school, or maybe a story about how your parents broached the topic with you, or pretty much anything you remember about your sex ed.
So I don't remember having a lot of sex ed. I come from a very religious background. So very religious upbringing is just like shame, the whole thing. So that is a whole topic for therapy. But what I would say of what I've learned of being so into sensory and really connecting, I'm really into mind, body, and I'm also into being in tune with my body, is then I've taught myself the kind of how powerful it is to just focus inward on it, and just kind of block out my mom's voice as I'm doing it. But yeah, I think that, so I remember teaching at a conference, and I was teaching about the pelvic floor, and a woman came up to me and she was like, when I do the pelvic floor stuff, like I have an orgasm, like it makes me, and I'm like, go girl, high five. Cause she was like, is something wrong with me? And I'm like, no, like that's actually a good thing that you are connecting and engaging in all of that. So I'm all into, what do they call it? Like an orgasm at the gym, like you're working your abs and you have an orgasm.
Orgasm.
Yeah. What's it called?
Orgasm is what I call it.
Okay. A corgasm. Yes. So I am all into that and helping women understand the normalcy of being able to do something like that. To me, that's very powerful.
Amazing. So at this convention, or where you were speaking, you were leading people through some exercises with their pelvic floor, and she was able to have an orgasm from engaging her pelvic floor in these really conscious, intentional ways.
Yeah.
Love that. Love that. That's awesome. Yeah. And I imagine that your kind of increased internal awareness of your sensations, of your body, like that ability to be fully embodied and present would be incredibly enhancing to your access to pleasure.
100%. Yeah. And that is something that I encourage any of the listeners to tap into.
Yeah.
That is. So I'll try to have an orgasm at the gym.
Totally. I remember the first time that happened to me and I was just like, what the fuck? It was awesome. It's great.
Well,
and I think
I have a total side random thing that it would happen to me. I didn't know this. I was a gymnast. So I was able to connect to my deep core at like a very early age and did not know that that was the pelvic floor. And I remember I would always want to like go work my abs. I was like 12 years old and I'm like having all these orgasms, not knowing that that's what they were. But I'm like, I feel great. I don't know why, but I'm in such a good mood. Let me go do my
Just got
abs
like
again.
a fucking 10 pack because I'm like constantly working out my core. I love that. Yeah, I remember the first time it happened to me in the gym, but and that was when I was a young adult in my 20s, but I remembered after that, oh, this has actually happened before because I used to, in primary school and high school, I would just kind of work out in my bedroom and do like push-ups and sit-ups. And I remember doing a whole bunch of sit-ups and it happening. And it was before I'd had an orgasm in any sexual context as well. So I had similarly to you, just zero idea of what it actually was. It just felt amazing and it made me want to do more sit-ups. And while you're like coming and doing lots of sit-ups and crunches, it just feels like you're so powerful.
I know. I feel very powerful compared to all the men when I'm at the gym because I'm just like, y'all don't know. I just had 3 orgasms, but hey, having a workout.
So good. So good. Oh my God. All right, cool. So give us a rundown on barefoot theory. A lot of people haven't heard of it or might have noticed, people in these shoes that look a little bit funny. I loved how you called them sock shoes because, I guess the more flexible and malleable they are and the less it feels like you're wearing a shoe and the less restrictive and stiff they are, the better. I'd love to just give people a rundown on barefoot theory and what makes you so passionate about it.
Yeah, so the whole barefoot shoes, barefoot running, this whole category of barefoot really hit mainstream 2008, 9, 10 when the Born to Run book came out and then the 5-finger
Yes, that's when
shoes, right? Yes. So
yeah.
Vibram is the name of the 5 fingers, Vibram 5 fingers, I think is what they call them. And Nike Free and just this whole category. And that's actually when I was first entering the industry. I graduated podiatry school and I was really focusing on that niche because of just really being in the right time and place. Time, place for it, have a certain degree of, my podiatry knowledge, and then being a former barefoot athlete, I was like, this is just perfect for it. So that's really the timing of it. And then the further that I got into barefoot science and the power of the foot from a sensory perspective, that's really what it's focusing on is the thousands of nerves in the bottom of the feet, how they influence the contraction of the pelvis stabilizers, how we feel our feet influences our movement, how it increases athletic performance. So there's all these incredible things that I was able to tap into that no one else was bringing mainstream that has benefit medically. So it could be someone who you're trying to prevent a fall, stroke, MS, Parkinson's, to athletes, professional athletes, to then just everyday people who want to optimize their foot health. So it's very, very powerful. To me, Barefoot Science, I consider it Barefoot Strong. And that's actually the name of my first book, Barefoot Strong. And to be barefoot strong does not mean that you walk outside barefoot and you don't wear shoes anymore and just everything you do is a barefoot lifestyle. Instead, it means that you have this inherent appreciation for the complexity and the integrated function of the human foot, and that you are doing something every day to really honor that appreciation. You're releasing your feet, you're finding good foot posture, you're strengthening and waking up the foot muscles, you're making sure those foot muscles connect to your core muscles so that you can better control your posture. And then if you really want to push into it, you are doing some form of foot exercises a couple times a week. I recommend at least 30 minutes of some sort of foot exercising every week.
Wow, 30 minutes just on the feet. All at once or in little bite-sized
So
bits?
it could be Pilates. If you take yoga, I lift weights barefoot. So it could be, so let's say every time I do my squats and my deadlifts and any of my exercises, I do it barefoot. So I'm building my strength from the ground up, which means I have to contract my foot muscles. Therefore, that's part of my foot workout, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, I think stuff like yoga and anything involving balance as well when you're barefoot is incredible for the feet, hey?
Yep. 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 And that's actually one of the most effective ways to strengthen your feet is to do balance exercises, barefoot balance exercises.
Yeah, because you just see how much your foot is actually working and adapting and constantly compensating for every tiny little movement when you're balancing on one foot and you look down and it's just rippling around, like your ankle's moving around, all of your ligaments. Like it's great because it's so active. And that just gives it such an intense little workout. So I love balance stuff. I like walking on cobblestones and like uneven surfaces as like a way to do that as well. Are there any other like little tips that people could kind of just take into their day to day? I mean, actually, so I've been using your Naboso ball, which has a little spiky things on it. So maybe even talk about that and why that's effective, what that does.
Yeah. So all of the Naboso products that you're referring to one of them, which is called the Neuroball, but all of the products at Naboso feature these tiny little pyramids. So I happen to have a different one, but little tiny pyramids that are stimulating the nerves in the bottom of the feet. And there's very specific nerves. And one of those nerves in your feet and your hands is sensitive to what's called 2-point discrimination. And it's essentially Braille. So when your finger reads Braille, you're actually sensing the 2 points and the distance between the Braille dots, right? So we are stimulating that same nerve in your feet, and it is designed to wake up the nerve so you can feel your feet. A lot of people actually have no idea where their feet are in space. So you can feel your feet. When you wake up the nerves, you wake up the muscles. When you wake up the muscles, you strengthen foot posture, which goes all the way up. It's also a really good way to support circulation. Not a lot of people think about circulation to their feet, but that's really important, especially for recovery. And then further along recovery is that the neural ball that you've referenced, it's a ball that splits into 2 halves. You would stand on them, and then that is a form of recovery, meaning like a massage, you could say.
Yeah, wow. I've been trying to do that every day for the last week since I got it, and I was kind of amazed how painful it can be. I was like, oh my god, like good pain. It's not unbearable. It was just like, oh wow, like my feet are really waking up here. This is a unique sensation that I haven't really experienced before.
Yes, but it's very specific. So it's not an arbitrary texture that we just made up and put on our products. It's actually based off of the stimuli that nerve responds to. So it's just very specific. It is a pyramid or a triangle. So you're feeling the points, but again, it's not made of metal. It's not made of plastic. It's stiff, but it's not like
it's friendly. It's very friendly.
Yeah, it's friendly.
Yeah.
People will say, okay, this is unique, right? I've not felt anything like this. I mean, you may say that it's kind of not addicting, but you do it, you're kind of like, okay, then you kind of want to do it again the next day, that you're drawn towards that stimuli and the sensation and how it makes your feet feel really awake.
Yeah, I guess sort of it seems a little bit more specifically designed and pinpointed, and I don't know anything about Shakti mats, but it sort of reminded me of like those Shakti mats with like the lots of sort of points so that you're lying on it, but because you're spreading your weight over it, it's not sort of painful, it's just stimulating. Or what do you think of those they're not shoes, they're kind of like slides, and they have lots of the little like bumps, so it's almost, I think the idea is that they're like reflexology shoes, and I've always wondered, like, is that just a marketing gimmick and actually it's not doing shit reflexology wise, or are they actually quite effective?
Yeah, so I don't know. So I like reflexology with a reflexologist and acupressure and things that are very specific. I don't know. I could see there's something powerful when you stimulate the foot. Now, could some of them be random quote unquote acupressure insoles that are just being swayed that way from marketing, and someone still feels a difference, I could say yes, because you're stimulating the foot in a way that you haven't before, right? So you are waking up these muscles and things like that. So I could definitely see that be an effect. I try to just not market through gimmicks.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Reflexology, like foot massages and stuff, are just incredible. Like, love. Excuse this quick interruption. I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the poddy because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab, and the more people who get to hear it, the more people I can help with it. Reviews and ratings actually do make a big difference to this little independent podcaster. And it's really easy to just quickly show your support by taking that simple act of either leaving 5 stars for the show on Spotify, or even better, writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Or if you're a real overachiever, you can do them both. That would be mad. If you're writing a review, though, just be sure to use G-rated words, because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't make it through the gates. Lame. Anyway, I would personally recommend doing that right now while you remember, just to get on top of it and let me know you're with me on this journey. Thanks, gang. Enjoy the rest of the epi. All right, beautiful. So let's, before we kind of wrap up, do the segment TMI. And this is a segment where I ask people for a TMI story. It doesn't even have to be around sex, just something that would usually be considered too much information for like your average conversation. I loved that we already kind of got one out of you with the corgasms. But if you have anything else that springs to mind, that would be lovely.
TMI, we love it. TMI, we love it.
Oh my gosh. I feel like it is totally TMI, but why not? I am fascinated with the whole squirting thing. That's my TMI. And so you said TMI, so girl, I'm going with it. So, I'm not recently, but a year out divorced, and I'm also in my 40s. So there hits a time or a phase where you're just kind of like, fuck it. You just want to kind of connect to yourself in a way. So anyway, this is with my boyfriend. I've been with him for a year. Is the first time that I've been so present. And my day is so stressful. As you can tell, I'm a very intense person when we first got on the phone, that I need something that allows me to just I am just in the moment. I'm in my body, and I've never connected that much to sex. And I really think it is from just sensorially being present and tuned in to my body, and the way that I just twitch. And then it literally is the first time I ever squirted. Don't even know how that happened. But anyway, that's my TMI. I think it's because I'm in my 40s and divorced and just tuned in with my body. So there you go.
It just sounds like you're craving a space where you can just actually surrender, because you just have to be so go the rest of the time, that this sexual space is now a safe space for you to just totally let go.
Well, yeah. And I was going to say that he very much, and I tell him this, that the reason that I'm like that is because he creates the energy and the embodiment of safety. So I can be just fully uninhibited, and just go with it and just feel all the feels. And I remember when I was younger having sex, earlier 20s, I'd be so in my head that then obviously that makes it very difficult to fully enjoy yourself. So you have to just I was like, I don't care what I look like. I'm twitching. I have no idea what my body is doing. I'm actually disconnected from my body. He thinks it's hot because he's just oh my God, I feel like the man. Because I'm just look what I'm doing. But it's really just letting go and just being like, don't know, don't care what it looked like, don't care what that expression looks like. I'm just really, really enjoying it and I need it. So yeah, anyway, I need that.
Yeah. That's the recipe. That's the recipe for great sex, is just that unleashing it, surrendering, letting yourself and your body just do what it wants to do without feeling any of that self-consciousness or overthinky or being inhibited by all of that sort of mind chatter. And it's something very commonly that I'm kind of teaching and helping women embody as well. So that's awesome. And I also recently did a whole episode on squirting with the world record holder for volume squirting, who can literally not even touch herself but just use her pelvic floor muscles to squirt on cue. So maybe listen to that one if you're fascinated by squirting. It's a really, really cool conversation.
Wow. Okay. I am I'm also very competitive. So now. Okay. Let's see.
Totally. Well, maybe next time she holds an event and sets a record, you can go toe to toe. But her name's Lola Jean. So if anyone's interested in that, it's squirting the down low with Lola Jean. Probably came out about a month ago. And I also, I'm curious if you know a woman who I just had on my potty a couple of weeks ago who's a fascia expert called Anna Ray, and she has GST Body, because I feel like you'd love her work as well. It's very complementary. She talks a lot about, like we were talking about fascia and the pelvic floor, and one of her tips was like just literally like lift your toes off the ground. That's a really great way to kind of juicy up the pelvic floor and stuff. So I feel like you're in good company. They're both from the States. So
love it. Yes. And then when having sex, definitely not think about the foot, but the foot is doing something when you're having sex. So
actually a lot of people talk about how they clench their toes, and I'm wondering like if you would have some sort of hypothesis around why that contraction of the toes helps them. I guess it's probably in those cases it's more based around the contraction based orgasms where they're maybe a little bit more clitoral focused, maybe a little bit more kind of like using the squeezing and the contracting of the muscles to like push out an orgasm, which can be a different experience to more of a surrendered kind of undulating orgasmic experience without that contraction. But a lot of people, when they want to get themselves across the line, they curl up their toes. So do you have any like thoughts on that?
Yes. So the connection to the pelvic floor, let's say from a contraction base, if you want like you're trying to push out a orgasm, is really in the toes. So toe flexion, it's in the toe flexors. The way that we do that action when we're standing is you would spread your toes nice and wide and then push them into the ground. And when you push them down, you essentially lift the pelvic floor. That's how you stack it or you sequence it. I typically teach this with breath. So as you're pushing the toes down and your pelvic floor is lifting, you are exhaling at the same time. So that is your stability stack, you could say. Now, the toe flexors, if you are off of the ground, so let's say you're doing a pull-up, right? So this is back to my gymnastics days and me doing all my orgasms at 12 years old. But even now at the gym, I'm doing a pull-up or anyone's doing a pull-up, you're hanging, you're doing something. If you hanging, your feet are off of the floor or you're on your back doing like a Pilates, if you actually point your toes and you engage the bottom of your foot and your toe muscles here, not that you're sickling the foot, but you're pointing it like a dancer, then that activates that same fascial line. You're just not pushing down into the ground. So the toe flexion, toe contraction is actually going into that. So I could see if someone is trying to really contract during sex to do that, and the foot is contracting as well, that makes sense. They're fascially connected.
Yeah, interesting. Cool. All right. Well, there was another couple of little things I had, but I'm just conscious of time. I wonder if you could briefly tell me what short foot is, because I'd never heard of that before.
So short foot is kind of what I was describing. Short foot is the exercise that I do to wake up the pelvic floor. It is what essentially sequences the foot to core connection or that deep front fascia line. Now, it was originally introduced by Dr. Yanda, who's a Czech physiatrist, and the way that he taught it is that if you imagine standing and then you have the ball of your foot and you use your foot muscles and you pull, it's like you're pulling the ball of the foot towards the heel to quote unquote shorten the foot, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the way that it used to be taught historically. Now, when I teach it in the toes because at the time of Dr. Yanda, we didn't understand the fascial lines the same way that we do now. So just what we know about the human body is very different from years ago. So the action that I teach is exactly what I had explained, that the toes push into the ground. And as you push your toes into the ground, you will then exhale and lift the pelvic floor. The other reason why I focus on the toes into the ground is because a lot of my work has been in athletics. So I need an athlete who, let's say you're just doing like box jumps and you're jumping onto a box and you need to contract your foot very quickly. Let's say that's the exercise or the focus. It's very hard to land and pull your foot back to shorten it the way that Dr. Yanda taught it. So I teach it just for speed and quickness, and that your brain can only do one thing at a time by giving a really quick cue to people, and that is essentially anchoring your toes. And when you anchor your toes, you exhale. So when you land, toes down at the same time. Mm-hmm. So there's a quickness in it. Now, short foot is, when you understand short foot and you use short foot, it becomes as integrated into your activities or your exercises, your workout, as breathing, which means short foot in itself is not as like just saying like, here's a bicep curl, but when I do a pull up, theoretically I use my bicep, right? So it's an element of a greater movement, meaning if you're swinging a kettlebell, every time you swing the bell up, I need you to do short foot as you swing the bell up. You're pushing your toes down. If you do a bicep curl, not even a lower body exercise, but every time you curl the bell up or the dumbbells up, I need you to push your toes into the floor. So it becomes a component of literally every exercise when you understand it. It's a lens at which you look at movement and stability. And that's why I often tell people that if you cue or you think about, well, where should I breathe? Where should I exhale? You should be thinking, where's my foot contracting? What are my toes doing for every exercise?
Wow. So it's kind of like the replacement for this really common cue that we get constantly drilled into us when we're doing any sort of exercise around like engage your core. But instead it's like, actually, let's look at the feet. Let's focus on engaging the toes in a particular way as like a protective kind of mechanism.
Yes, 100%. And I will play with toes down. So that toes down, anchor, core engage, pelvic floor. Remember I said it's the posture pelvic floor. So when your toes go down and you exhale, it's really your levator ani that is lifting, that should be lifting, that you feel, which is why when I teach the pelvic floor, I want people to feel the differentiation, even though oftentimes they contract as a unit or people are more anteriorly dominant. I want them to know, what does the anterior pelvic floor feel like? What does the posterior pelvic floor feel like? And can you engage the front and engage the back separately, just out of a kind of a mind muscle, almost like patting your head, rubbing your belly? Like, can you just identify different parts of your body like that? And then ultimately, when you're doing it, toes down, levator ani up, exhale. You had mentioned about your other guest had said lift the toes. Sometimes I will play with that as well, because what happens when you lift your toes is there's a co-contraction in the body for your quads. So your quads will contract when you lift your toes. And then when your quads contract, your transverse abdominals will contract. So you can play with, essentially in that exercise or in that moment, are you feeling the toes up? Are you feeling the toes down? Just like no sleepy toes. Like you got to do something with that.
Yeah.
Up or down. Like I don't, there's some intent and tension in the toes.
Yeah. And it's such a simple little thing that you can just be mindful of. I think if memory serves, I think Anna was saying lifting the toes, like not when you're exercising, more just if you're sort of standing or whatever, just to align your posture and your pelvis, just to kind of like realign sort of thing. Although maybe I have to go and listen to it again. But I think it was because we are often in such, maladapted alignment in our posture, and our pelvises are very, very commonly tucked under. And so I think lifting the toes was her way of just reminding us to just get that pelvis and that sort of first quartile, just like sort of tilted back in the proper way so that your spine's got the lower back curve and things, like rather than the kind of tucked under pelvis and the like contracted core. Which are really common cues that we get and wind up kind of holding our bodies in this way that, aren't really designed to be getting around in. But I mean, there's so much different advice out there. It's hard to keep it all in mind. So I love a very simple little one where it's just like, all I have to do is just focus on what my toes are doing, and I know that I'm doing a good thing.
Yeah. I'm actually glad that you had mentioned about, so there is, and a lot of this is kind of societal pressure of like, okay, your flat stomachs. You get a lot of people who are constantly like sucking in their stomach, and then they get a dominance of the abdominal muscles because they're just holding on, so the way that I often cue the pelvic floor also, which then ties into the feet, which just has to do with how does our body fascially and muscularly just navigate being on 2 feet is really what it is, is that we want to essentially ebb and flow into all of these things. So almost like a wave. So I teach a lot of relaxation of the pelvic floor and the feet and kind of the letting go component. And I guess that would then tie into the sex aspect as well, is that maybe half of the issues that the individual who's having a hard time just fully experiencing their sexual experience is that they're just kind of holding on too much, and it's more of a letting go. So and that was something that I connected with when I have a 5-year-old daughter, that my obstetrician at that time was like, woo, like those fitness people, like any woman who's like Pilates, right? He's just like, oh my God, they take forever in pregnant or in labor because they just don't know how to just let go. And he's like, you actually want to like let go. And my ex-husband at the time would like stretch my vagina. Like I would just lay there and he would essentially just be like fisting me to try to get it to like relax, which is that could have been my TMI, but is remembering the let go as well. And that's with our feet also, that can we dance in and out of tension and relaxation from our feet to our pelvis, everywhere within the body, when we're in gravity and then when we're not in gravity. So when we're on our back, but then like, how do we still kind of dance in it when we are in gravity?
Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers. Or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order. You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps, because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. And I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later. Yeah. Yeah, big time. I'm glad you mentioned that because that's definitely something that I would probably find myself working on with clients more commonly than the fact that, like, it's more common that they are too tight and contracted and have this hypertonic pelvic floor and this inability to let go and release and relax and lengthen.
Yeah.
That's more common than the opposite. And so we're always told, like, suck in your tummy, engage your core, everything's about tension and doing Kegels and squeezing and contracting. And we've kind of often lost the ability to lengthen and relax. Plus, we're in this heightened state of stress and like holding all the fucking time. So my biggest kind of job, like my work's cut out for me usually in regards to helping people learn to do that letting go and relaxing more than anything else, because it's such a big one with pleasure and with sex as well. So yeah, definitely love that. And the ebb and flow between them is important, to have that articulation rather than just being kind of locked into a certain position or always switched on. So
Yeah.
love that. Beauty. All right. Well, I know you've got to go pick up your daughter. So is there anything you wanted to leave us with on this topic that you feel like we haven't covered before I let you go?
I would say I know obviously there's a lot of focus towards the pelvic floor and the pelvis, but can the listeners do a practice of connecting to their feet? I like to do eyes shut practices to feel the feet. And you can even just stand with your arms by your side and your eyes shut and just really feel your feet and feel the texture of the carpet that you're standing on, or feel the heat, cold, whatever temperature sensation you may have. Do you feel the tripod? Do you feel the 5 toes? And then where do you feel pressure under your feet? Do you feel more on one foot than the other? Do you feel pressure towards the front of the feet, the back of the feet, the inside of the feet, the outside? So I'll actually guide people through this tuning into their feet practice. And it's a really good way to just kind of focus inward on your foundation. And then if you do connect to that, I like to have the listeners then feel the rest of their body and just see if there's any sort of postural fatigue anywhere else, like maybe the lower back. And could they feel the connection between their feet and where they feel any other postural pressure, let's say.
Beautiful. I love that. Yeah, we did a lot of stuff like that in my yoni mapping training and internal pelvic release training around the feet. And I love to just give my feet a little massage every now and then as well, and just like really nurture and look after your feet, because they do so much work and they're actually so important and so neglected. So yeah, I love that you're a foot nerd, and I'll put links to all of your work and resources in the show notes. I'll be continuing to use my Neuroball from Naboso, which is your company. And I really appreciate your time today, Emily.
Of course. Thank you. It was so much fun.
And that's it, darling hearts. Thanks for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. If you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that's a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism, and you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify and destigmatize with this here podcast. I'm also always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, questions or guest suggestions, so feel free to get in touch via my website or over on Insta. You can also send me in TMI stories to be shared anonymously on the pod. My handle is FreyaGraf_the Labia Lounge, if my account hasn't been deleted for being too sex positive, which, is always a possibility with censorship. But just in case the chronic censorship finally does obliterate my social channels, I'd highly recommend going and joining my mailing list and snagging yourself some fun freebies for the trouble at www.freyagraf.com/freebies. Anyway, later, labial legends. See you next time.